Welcome, friends, lovers, companions, accomplices, adjuncts, showrunners, critics, and of course, faithful listeners to the semi-centennial episode of the 706 podcast, which started when a band of four gentlemen from a city on the Atlantic decided to come together right now to deduce and proclaim with unceasing certitude the 706 greatest movies ever created by man. My name is Kirk, and I'm your host for this special soiree, seen as some 49 episodes, 5 years, and one pandemic ago, I humbly brought forth the first film for consideration to my exalted, refined, unparalleled, and sensual co-hosts, Connor, Anthony, and of course, Tony. And what a first film it was, Spice World, full of musical numbers, assless chaps, and credible threats of suicide by the esteemed Richard Grant. As the process now goes, the three voted in our humble dorm room, number 706 in NYU's Greenwich Hall in the West Village of Manhattan, to decide whether or not the movie would make our hallowed canon. Unfortunately, my cretinous co-hosts dismissed its genius and voted it down. But alas, the next week we were at it again, as the three co-hosts nominated a prospective movie I chose from among them, and the cycle began anew. My, what a joyous, whimsical, and edifying ride it's been. From Paris to New York, LA to Hawaii, Japan to Jordan, Berlin to England, and around the world again. We've braved war-torn Belarusian skirmishes, raids on Indonesian drug lords, the bestial wrath of precocious primates, and even the lethal dangers of brown sex workers not giving white chads in Paris their chicken tendies with honey mustard. We've swooned over ageless femme fatales, been party to fiery orgasms at Katz's Deli, found forbidden love in two-dimensional France, and marveled at the guile of some maidens in the Civil War South. Most of all, however, we found a way to deepen our friendships through experiencing and reveling in the timeless and telling stories of the human condition, flaws and all. There is clearly no through line that connects all of the films in our disparate canon, though perhaps one moral we can heed through all the drama and laughter, killings and kisses, smiles and tears, is that, in the words of Michelle McNamara, it's chaos, be kind. Well, folks, once again, welcome to our 50th episode of the 706 podcast. As I said before, my name is Kirk. Let's go around and introduce our co-hosts.
Anthony.
Tony, why don't you say hi?
Hi, guys. I'm Tony.
Anthony, say hi for the folks.
Anthony.
And Connor, of course.
Hey, everybody. I'm Connor.
Yes. Well, thank you all for being here. This special episode, we are going to examine the history of each of our choices. We're going to typify what our movie tastes are like, right? And we are going to go around in a systematic way, and each one of us is going to mention a movie that we liked that that person chose, and then we're going to discuss what makes a typical movie said person's proclivities, right? Like, what do they like? What is a Tony movie? What is an Anthony movie? So without ado, let us begin with the most cool and collected member of the 706, Anthony. Anthony, are you nervous? Are you excited?
No, I'm curious. I feel like my movie tastes, at least in this list, from start to kind of where we are now, are really all over the place. So I don't know what each of you would pick. I kind of have an idea, but I would never bet on it.
Fair enough. All right. Who would like to start? Tony, why don't you throw out an Anthony movie you liked?
So my favorite Anthony movie was weird because when we did our last, every few episodes we do a retrospective on the history of the podcast. I mean, half of these are clip shows at this point. But when we did our last little retrospective and did our different awards, I got the love star for Anthony because I voted for more of his movies than anyone else. But it's funny because going back and looking at his movies, there were relatively few that blew me away. And I'm limiting myself also to movies that that he's introduced me to, movies that I didn't already know. But, I might pick Blue Velvet, for instance, right? Not necessarily, but maybe. But because I already am familiar with Blue Velvet, I'm not going to pick it. So I'm going to limit it to ones he's introduced to me. So the one, going back, that I think I was most impressed by, perhaps because it's the closest to a stereotypical Tony movie, was The Beguiled. I really enjoyed The Beguiled. I loved how unsettling it was, how icky it was. I love when movies play with kind of the more unsavory and dark aspects of human nature and kind of the darkness and perversion within us, and I thought that movie played with that so expertly, in addition to its kind of provocative and interesting historical setting. There was just so many things in that movie that I thought you could kind of pick apart and have fun with in a way where it was fun to talk about, but it was also very exciting to watch, which sometimes, as we've discussed before, those two things don't always go together necessarily. But that was a movie where I was on the edge of my seat the whole time, and I had a blast kind of unpacking it with you guys. So that to me is the best, quote unquote best, or my favorite Anthony movie so far.
Connor, let's hear from you.
I would second that, and my favorite is also The Beguiled. It really jumps out at me. I'm not sure it's a quintessential Anthony movie, which we can discuss later, but I would echo what Tony said. It was such an interesting viewing experience because it's campy in ways, it's over the top in ways. It has that 70s griminess to it, but when you get down to it, and especially when you compare it to the sort of slightly more papered over, smoother, more elegant, remake by Sofia Coppola, it gets to the level of ideas very effectively, and it really puts everything on the table in a way. And anyway, I really love The Beguiled. I think it might be my favorite Anthony movie overall, though I would give an honorable mention, another one that's a little odd, I think, for Anthony. It's not necessarily in his direct wheelhouse, but to the Wild Goose Lake, which, if you remember, I just love that movie. I think I was way higher on it than anyone else, but that was just really struck me as a movie that, it was kind of, sort of in the vein of a cool modern movie, in the vein of a Drive or something, a Refn kind of movie, but just so striking and just so purposeful. I don't know, maybe my brain was going in the right direction, but that's one that really sticks in my head as well for Anthony.
And then I'll round it out. Yeah, I'll round it out. Say, I've enjoyed many movies that Anthony's put forth. I would say that probably my favorite movie that we've watched because of Anthony might have to be Amelie, I think, actually. Amelie's a great film. It's just really well done. So touching, right? Like, not often, so many movies have these rough edges, and Amelie is just so well crafted, and it's really, humanistic, right? I don't even know if that's the right word to use, but it connects you to, and it puts you into the world of Amelie, the self-titled protagonist, and I really enjoyed it. And just the aesthetic, I had recently moved to New York, and it just felt so worldly, right? And away from the kind of the mess and dregs of the ultra violence of modern blockbusters, and it felt like a nice antidote to that, and so I appreciate that. So yeah, a few thoughts from everybody on what typifies an Anthony movie, an Anthony film. Who would like to start? Tony?
I'll start, since I started before. I think Anthony's actually his tastes have refined a little bit. They've changed a little bit over the years, and I think you can see that in kind of the pitches and the selections, because I think early on, obviously he was a big like Wes Anderson fan, a big Tim Burton fan, and I think he responded to these kind of quirky, very colorful sort of worlds, these directors who would create these like colorful, fantastic worlds. And Amelie as well, it's got kind of that's part of what makes something quirky and has that kind of almost Sundance effect, and I think that he very much gravitated towards that aesthetic early on. But if you look over the course of the 50 episodes spread out over 25 years, you can see that he has really kind of moved away from that a little bit. I don't think even intentionally. I think now he sort of shows this very easy kind of command of like film history and from all different eras. And there's an incredible eclecticism and diversity in his choices. Something like his counterpart at The Wild Goose Lake, which is not what we think of as an Anthony movie, and then The Beguiled, and then Royal Tenenbaums. And then, I think he, as well as Connor, obviously showcases a lot of older films. And I think Anthony picks a lot of like more romantic films or like sentimental films also. I think those are two things that I think he kind of responds to. I think he likes kind of the romance of old Hollywood, the yearning of old Hollywood, and that sense of movies as something magical and transporting, and the power of cinema in that way, right? And I think those are the things he kind of responds to, and that makes him want to share a movie.
Well said.
I would think like, I mean, I would echo that. I mean, like, here are some words for Anthony, some adjectives. Pensive, quaint, nostalgic, and of course, quixotic. Though I would also add one more to that, more recently. That's a new facet of your personality, Anthony, and that is Marxist. And anyway, but no, I mean, I think we've seen that evolution too. I think you have a more political dimension now to some of your thinking, and I think you've expanded beyond. You know, it used to be very aesthetic for you. I think. I would think. I mean, I'm flattening. We shouldn't just be like us talking about Anthony. He should be able to speak up for himself, right? It feels a little weird just to like go on and on about what I think Anthony's all about, because I have very limited, perspective. But no, I mean, I found that really interesting, that change. I mean, I think you look at, for instance, another adjective is chivalrous. Anthony always sticks up for the ladies. I think that's one thing. Anthony has more of like a feminine touch than I think any of us do. I think he's more in touch with a wider range of experiences. Like I would say, like his first 3 movies are very, very much, I would say, are quintessential Anthony movies. Maybe first 4. So Amelie, right? Royal Tenenbaums, Wes Anderson, of course, right? That both of them have that aesthetic. Sure, maybe Twee, but already he was reacting against that. I don't think that's sort of a side effect of something that Anthony does like. When Harry Met Sally, right, and Shop Around the Corner, right, that covers all the bases of the nostalgia, going to the past. But even with
the 4 are romance movies too.
Sure, the
love stories, yeah.
That's the quixotic. No, I'm not sure. Quixotic really captures that, but yeah, no, I think that is telling. But Shop Around the Corner already has the seeds of kind of class commentary. It's already there, and already the very early Anthony joints. But yeah, that's what I would say for Anthony.
Yeah, I'm not going to kind of reiterate what you guys have so eloquently said, but I think one movie for me that stands out is Beauty and the Beast, right? So on the surface, just this very, like Connor said, quaint. It's distant almost. It's not necessarily the most visceral experience, but it's a love story. And then you can bring in this subversive intellectual edge to these movies, and this ability to critique movies from a variety of dimensions, Anthony. I think that really makes you an asset, and could lend itself to I think professional critique. I think all of you could, but I could do like a barstool critique, but that's about it. But no, Anthony, I think you really have that way about you, and I don't even know if it's an evolution, but more just feeling a little more comfortable in this exercise. I think you might have had that all along, but perhaps showing a different side to us. And I think, Cosmopolis was a really ambitious pick for you, but I hope it portends of those types of films in our future, because it was an informative and exhilarating pick in a way. And I hope we get more of that. But let's let Anthony react. Let's let him say,
let's let him answer for his crimes.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I think it's fascinating, because I think on one hand about this, right, is, well, maybe Kirk is the exception, and to some extent Connor, but I think most of us, I probably withheld our more diehard favorites, the ones that like we would absolutely die on the hill for, the ones that like if you guys ever said anything bad about, we'd run into the corner and kind of cry a little. I think Kirk, you're the exception in the sense, because at least based on the way you've talked about Come and See, for instance, is a movie that affected you in a certain way at the time, at least. So, like, in a way, the movies we've offered are, on one hand, kind of selected because we think they'll maybe chosen, or we hope they will be. But on the other hand, they're kind of, like, different. They're very specific to points in time, not just of the episode, but who we were at that, like, point and place. I almost wish I wrote down what I thought everyone's favorite would be beforehand, so I don't just sound like I'm kind of just saying this. But I feel like going into this, if I was to assume, I thought Connor was going to pick The Beguiled. I had a good feeling about that, actually. the Wild Goose Lake part threw me. Similarly, I thought Tony was probably going to do like a Blue Velvet or something. And he kind of threw me with the Beguiled. That was a surprise. Kirk, I was kind of hovering. I thought maybe you would go for the more sentimental kind of movies I did, especially in the beginning with like the Royal Tenenbaums. I thought that was going to be your movie. So I was actually pretty interested that you picked Amelie because I remember like Tony being kind of reserved, for instance, even though I think he voted a soft yes, or maybe it was a soft no. But
I think it was a soft no, but I liked it. Like it wasn't, yeah.
Yeah, but it was just such a specific point in place in time when we kind of started it. So it's always fascinating to hear, right? And the kind of things. And I think, you know, everyone was right in the way like tastes have adjusted. And just from like what I see, like, you know, I'm kind of glad of some of my choices from the beginning to the animation to the documentary of Adam Curtis to Wild Goose Lake and Cosmopolis. I think I'm glad I look back and I'm like, I really covered different bases.
Yeah.
So that's the big part for me.
Fact check. Tony did vote for yes for Amelie.
Soft yes, I think. Yeah.
Oh, did we? Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Connor is our Robin to Tony's Howard Stern. He chimes in. Let's move on to Connor. Enough fawning over Anthony. Let's go to
on
Connor.
over me, guys.
I shouldn't start every time because I don't want to steal the let's stagger it. So let's have Kirk.
Anthony hasn't said anything. Yeah, I'll go first on you, Tony. I'll rip you.
All right, you and me and you. All right.
It's a teaser for the rest of it. No. All right. So we're doing favorite pick to start, right?
Yeah.
So this is interesting because Connor's also, I think, had a pretty interesting array of movies. And I think when I was thinking about this over the week or, you know, since we've talked about doing this, I was hovering between a number of different choices, but there was one that really, I think, came to me first. And I think I instantly knew this. And that's Terry Gilliam's Brazil. And I have a number of different points, which is just that one is when I first saw that movie, I liked it, but I was sort of underwhelmed at the same time. I never thought I was going to go back to see it. And that's actually something to bring up too, is a lot of these movies, honestly, I haven't revisited since like I've either pitched them or since we've done them. But Brazil has kind of stuck with me a number of the ways. But I give a kind of honorable mention to Little Big Man, which was, I think, Connor's first movie. Yeah, Connor's first movie. That's right. I also want to give Connor the kind of award for breaking us most out of kind of the normal rut of movies we may be doing. I think the kind of willingness to suggest something and get it picked, Battleship, selling it as kind of the conservative film choice, to doing something like Footnote, which I think I picked. I don't remember who picked Battleship, but Footnote, which, you know, I never would have seen that movie on my own, despite it almost sounding like something I would have done. So I think even if they don't always land, I think they're kind of interesting. And just like similarly, revisiting something like Shaun of the Dead was kind of a curious pick. So.
Very fair. Very fair. Connor's really expanded my view both through time and space. You mentioned Footnote, you mentioned some other interesting one like Little Big Man, you know, some of the 70s, and then you get into the 50s. But I think the movie that stands out for me, one of the favorites that we've watched, is Woman Under the Influence. Such a great film. Unbelievable, so moving, so haunting and harrowing, and just like the relationship on display and the kind of seething vulnerability of the husband and his helplessness, like his emasculation almost on display is so raw. And I love it, and I just love the aesthetic and the fact that it came out in the time it did. I think it's a 70s film, right? It has to be
73, 74, yeah. I think. I forget.
So that's my favorite Connor pick, far and away. But not to say that there aren't other ones I've loved, and there's sure
that one was for you, Kirk. When I picked it, I had you in mind.
I know you did pick it for me. But... See, and that shows your acute or apt ability to deduce what we would like to ingest as kind of moviegoers. So
Tony, so often I think I get it right, but yeah. So.
Well, speaking of the person who picked Battleship, I think it was Mr. Tony. Was that correct, Tony?
Kirk, I don't remember. Probably.
Okay.
I think it probably was Tony.
Probably would have done something like that. I mean, I have a couple battleships of my own in there, you know. So
yeah,
that's like we have a nice little battleship collection. It's a wing of our museum. with Barney and the Book of Henry.
Book of Henry, yeah.
Yeah. So no, yeah, Woman Under the Influence for me as well.
I picked Battleship.
Impression.
You picked Battleship. Oh, that's such an out of left field. Yeah.
That would have been such an Anthony pick. No, yeah, it was a Woman Under the Influence for a lot of reasons Kirk said, obviously. But yeah, I mean, it was my introduction to Cassavetes, and I just thought the performances were so incredible. The cinematic style was just so potent. It was so brilliantly deployed to tell that story. It was such an emotionally overwhelming experience, and I think and it's just my introduction to John Cassavetes too. It's still I've kind of gone back and explored more of his stuff, but A Woman Under the Influence is still my favorite. I think it's the most emotionally affecting film he's made. I haven't seen all of them, but of the ones I've seen, and I thought it was such a perfect suggestion, such a perfect addition to the canon, our canon. So yeah, so for a lot of the reasons Kirk said, that was my pick as well.
Yeah, no, it's funny about if you don't mind me butting in here, Kirk. It's funny about Woman Under the Influence. It wasn't like I didn't know Cassavetes that much before. I just happened to see the movie on YouTube. I don't know how I discovered it. I'd heard of Cassavetes before. I also knew him like, oh, he's the actor guy who also did movies. But yeah, I just ended up watching it on YouTube, and I was just completely floored. Obviously, I responded to it. There's the '70s element. Maybe that was sort of prime me. I love that period, the early '70s. But I think it's a little different from a lot of movies that I like. So I'm really glad I was able to bring that, and you guys got to see it because it did speak to me too. Yeah.
All right. So what is a Connor movie? How can we define his taste, at least on this podcast, as far as that's concerned? Anthony,
a lot of isms, a lot of ists.
No, yeah. Yeah, the sort of Setlaxian film. I feel like I'm almost obliged to say, though, it's like, what's curious is about a number of these movies is the ones that resonate with like people I just felt totally cold by, which includes A Woman Under the Influence. But I think using that as my starting point, right? And actually, I realized they could draw like
another adjective for Krishna, Anthony Contrarian. Yeah, okay.
No, but the thing is okay. So I think the things that have stayed consistent with the Connor pick is historic revisionism, the idea of playing with history almost to the parodic level, whether it's Little Big Man or the Americanization of Emily. What can we uncover in history that leaves our heroes in doubt, sadness, and hypocrisy is kind of I think the main goal. I think if we were to do this in the first half, I'd also probably say like maybe there's a male-oriented kind of perspective, like in the sense of a Terry Gilliam or a Edgar Wright Shaun of the Dead. I mean, we didn't do this, but he was so close to picking Scott Pilgrim. The sort of almost male idea of looking at your life, that sort of retrospective culture involved. And I think even still, that stayed consistent to some degree with A Serious Man. Even
Serious Man, yeah. Also,
yeah, I'm trying to think. I feel like the biggest kind of outlier is, this is hard, I'm like looking through. I'm like, what is kind of the outlier? I almost want to say like Battleship to some degree, but it's also like, I think the other thing with Connor is the willingness to give the other side a sort of due, whether it's not necessarily agreement and not necessarily like acceptance, but just to understand the kind of outside perspective.
That's what I'm all about.
Monkey Shines. Monkey Shines, I think, really is the biggest default, like kind of outlier. I think it's clear if you know us, but I think if I were to think about these movies and that's the outlier.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard. I think Connor has the least defined aesthetic for us. His selections, his nominations have been so disparate, right? Like it's almost like he's playing with us, right? He's showing us this side of this nebulous, amorphous taste aesthetic, but we can't really define it, right? It shapeshifts when we try to put our thumb on it. So he'll come out of left field with The Battleship or Little Big Man's pretty classic, pretty tried and true.
That feels yeah, kind of.
Yeah,
that was the first one, so that kind of set the standard. That kind of set the.
Which one?
Little Big Man was his first one, so that's kind of set the tone. Yeah.
No, I think Connor likes stories with an element of tragedy. I think he can appreciate that. He likes to, perhaps we all do, but that's just something that popped into my head. Something about worldliness, but also kind of this idea of reflecting upon one's life and reflecting upon the mark we leave on the world and through our work or perhaps through our relationships. And I think about like a movie like Footnote, right? And that's kind of that's a classic one for me in terms of one that but also kind of you look at someone who's very interested in exploring the world around him, like through Brazil, right? Brazil was a Connor movie. Yeah. And someone who's very considerate at the end of the day, because he likes to tailor his choices to the person who's choosing. And I think that speaks to his personality. He's very considerate.
Sometimes just to get picked, though.
Sometimes just to get picked, but other times, such as when you nominated A Woman Under the Influence, to kind of expand our horizons, and I really appreciate that. So yeah, I guess I didn't say too much, except Connor continues to surprise me, and I want to see what's next, because I feel like Connor has the movies that I want, and he's seen at like 3 a.m. in Broome Hall or whatever, wherever he was, and I want those movies in my head. So just give me the details, Connor.
I've got plenty of them, Kirk. Thanks.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, I think for one thing, the most obvious thing is I think from the beginning, Connor has been the most consistent advocate for doing like older movies, like black and white movies and stuff. And I think he has done that very consistently. And I think he keeps us from being too complacent or having too much of a recency bias, which I think is very good for the podcast. I also think Connor differs from the rest of us in terms of the way he kind of discovers movies and he kind of accumulates kind of favorites. Cause I think that for me and Anthony, we're both more like self-consciously like seeking out things of like, okay, like I want to see more Middle Eastern films. I want to see more documentaries. I want to see this. I want to cross this off my list, right? Connor just sort of like will happen to he'll watch this like 1972 Israeli movie that he found on YouTube once. He's like, oh, it's really good. And I'm like, how did you even find that? Like, I feel like he just has like this, there's an omnivorousness to Connor's taste, and also like a lack of, I think, self-consciousness to it. Just like kind of this, he will just organically like find these things, and he'll like find like really cool stuff sometimes. And there are times when I wish I could kind of shed a little bit of that self-consciousness and shed some of that, like, I think he's very good at just watching things and absorbing things and like taking things in. And I think that what he chooses to pitch are always very like well selected. Like he's definitely thought about it. And it's definitely like, this is a thing that would be valuable. This is a thing that they would enjoy. This would be something worth it to discuss. Even something like Monkey Shines, honestly, like, I think that was a very like tasteful pick for that. It was the perfect movie for that setting, right? For doing a Halloween, like a fun Halloween episode. So that's what I would say about kind of is Connor's kind of aesthetic, or that's like, which isn't very like substantive or specific, but I do think that is like an important part of kind of how he approaches movies, or even like, music and other things as well.
Yeah. Like in 1983 Sudanese underground film on Vimeo, he's like, hey, check this out,
Exactly.
But Connor, speak for yourself. What do you have to say?
Speak for myself. Well, I would just like to say that all of you are very close to capturing my essence. But of course, none of you really understand it because you didn't all vote yes for Hidden Fortress. So I'm afraid if only you had understood Hidden Fortress, you would understand. But no, I think you guys said all things that are very true of me. Yeah, I think all my movies, or most of them, I guess they're always outliers. I would think Footnote, I've definitely have a sort of an antiquity bias. I'm kind of an antiquarian. It's kind of my job. I love seeking out old things. If it's old, I find it intrinsically more interesting somehow. So I find that I'm out of the loop on more modern movies, and I rely on friends like Tony and Anthony for those. And yet I think I agree with there's something actually that Anthony said about the maleness. That actually is true when you think about it. Like a lot of them, they're kind of like sort of lofty, takes on some kind of male issue or something, right? I think that is true, or they're metaphorical for something. Like Shaun of the Dead is kind of a metaphor for like a certain kind of 20-something's life or whatever, right? Like there's a lot of that. So I really like that kind of thing. I really like, though Kirk mentioned the idea of tragedy, which I definitely am enamored of. And I would say that, or I can't say enamored of tragedy, but I always prefer tragedy to a comedy. I a problem to be identified than for a solution to be offered to something. And that's really true of me. But at the same time, I really do like humor, and I think it's all going to be similar. I have a very particular sense of humor. I think it may be hit or miss for some people, but I love, like, Brazil, I think, is almost the perfect representative movie because it kind of bridges all those things. It's kind of nostalgic. It has all these kind of 40s references. It's playful, but then it is also funny, right? It's funny on top of being also kind of heart-wrenching and tragic. So I would say, yeah, I think you guys, pretty much hit the nail on the head, but I'm a little disappointed in you for not picking Hidden Fortress, but maybe we'll have another chance. Yeah. No, but thank you.
Stick around.
This was very flattering.
I would love if Kirk had stood up and like lifted his shirt. There's a giant Hidden Fortress tattoo on his chest. I
watched it. I loved it.
We're constantly changing, right? Our opinions of these movies can change daily, hourly. Like, I think if I had seen Cachet a year later, I might have had a totally different reaction to it.
Sure.
And
or the next day too, yeah.
Or the next day, or if I had, I don't know, just had a cigarette or whatever, had a beer.
Maybe you read some dang books, pal. Maybe then
you read
exactly. If I weren't so illiterate, and ignorant, I would have understood that the end credits scene explained the whole movie. On that note, let us go to the prankster, the jokester. Our, typical kind of, this needler. He gets us. He gets at us. He knows our weaknesses. He knows our tendencies, and he wants to subvert them. Of course, I'm talking about Tony Palmunzi.
He is the dark jester.
He's the dark jester
of the podcast.
He's the well, we can go into more about what he is or who he is, but let us choose a movie. Let me choose a movie. I'm gonna choose. I would say that probably my favorite movie that he has suggested has to be Night Moves. And no, just kidding. It's got to be Krisha. Krisha was great. Krisha is perfect to me. Tony and I feel like Tony, each of us has a connection or a certain
spirit twin,
kind of like fibrous connection to another person through a specific lens. And Tony and I think can mesh in terms of visceral human emotion, right? Like Tony and I both really like people that are put in uncomfortable situations and let's see what happens. And I think Tony has kind of actually helped me to define that. But I see Krisha as just this movie. It's an experiment by, this person who's part of a family. Every family has secrets and every family has, their own histories, right? And their own understandings. And at holidays, we bring all of that with us in the bags that we carry into the house or whatever, in our DNA. And I think that's so perfect. A dramatic situation. And I really loved it. And thank Tony for, he was a film major. He brings the heavy hitters. I mean, we all do, but Tony, he has this, I guess I'm merging the segments. So let's go on to Anthony, and then we'll finish off with Connor. So.
Sure. I mean, I think some of this could be saved for the next part, but I think what you're on, or what you were saying, Kirk, is spot on. It's what happens when the secrets that we think are secret are sort of finally known to the sort of society, the family, the culture, the group around us, is a kind of, essential feature in a lot of Tony's movies, however you pick them, whatever the genre, whatever the year, on and on. But I think as a favorite is, I think Tony's willingness to kind of go outside some of the conventional choices, to really push us to things that he kind of responded to, but he knows we wouldn't. So I think this was hard, but I think I'm going to go kind of recency bias here, but I think Spring Breakers and Book of Henry are tied for me. Spring Breakers was, again, a movie I didn't necessarily love, but I think that was the one. That was one, though, where his argument and, the argument you posed and helped him with, Kirk, was really kind of persuasive, I think. And it really made me see a side to the movie I could appreciate even if I didn't respond to. I think Book of Henry, though, was a movie that honestly, it's one of those movies that you kind of remember years down the road in a way that like is just very interesting and very unique. Like I keep thinking about it, and I keep thinking about Tony's sort of Mulholland Drive interpretation of that movie, and just waiting for it in the little sort of online IMDb review.
It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen, guys.
People are sharing on Reddit, you know.
I love that you picked two movies you both voted no on. Like it's like wow, like really.
Well, I should say I voted no on a lot of yours, right?
Oh.
Like because Connor even gave that, right? That award.
Yes, you voted no. There was one point where you voted no on all of the ones I've ever suggested. So I don't think. Yeah. Anyway.
Connor, go ahead. You know, Connor, I know you got some incisive commentary about our man Tony.
No, I mean, so we're just picking our favorite, right? For now.
Just that for now.
Yeah.
So I have to go with Krisha too. It's just on a pure just you know, Tony had already shown it to me before, and Tony shows me a lot of really cool movies. Some not so cool, some that I don't like as much, I should say. All of them are cool and all of them are interesting. But I had seen it once before, but on the second watching for the podcast, it just really moved me. I was very touched by it. I don't know how else to describe it. I think you guys have described the general how the movie works. Obviously, it's it's social perspective, but just on a pure level of pathos, I think it affected me like no other movie we've watched for the podcast. And I still think back on, and I obsessively rewatched just the scene that sort of precedes kind of the second act sort of climax, where Krisha is cooking a turkey and looking around. And it's a very memorable sequence, but it just sticks in my head as just a real moment, unlike any I've had in a long time with movies. So I think that has to win. I'll give an honorable mention to a really fun episode, which is The Social Network. I really enjoyed that episode. And I like
that was a Kirk suggestion, though.
That was a Kirk suggestion?
Yes.
Oh, wait. No, sorry. Okay, my bad. Social Network was suggested as an anti-pick by Kirk. I'm sorry. My streams crossed here. Okay, I have another sort of backup. I think probably the greatest of the movies that Tony has suggested, but one that I did not necessarily vibe with as much as I did with Krisha is Age of Innocence, of course. Or did Anthony pick that? Did Anthony suggest that one? I'm not sure.
No, that was Tony.
Age of Innocence. That was me.
Yeah.
I'm flattered that a movie I pitched could be considered an Anthony movie. That's really the highest.
That's what you've been striving for.
Yeah, exactly.
No one said bookish on mine.
Well, that's a given. That's just implied. Yeah. So Tony, this is this is something I think Tony has aggravated me the most out of you three, and it's not even close, because his movies, I bring this deep cynicism to the movie scene, right? To my experience with watching movies. Certain things stick to me like glue, and I don't want to let go of them. And I almost resent the movie for portraying something, or for some sort of foible. Tony, as is evidenced by his worship of Jonah Hill, is able to forgive almost any flaw in a movie. And no, I think what it really speaks to at the end of the day is Tony knows the process intimately. He knows what is involved in like creating a piece of art, in this medium. And I think he can really find something to love in most of the movies he sees, and he kind of has this way of playing them back in his head and comparing and making these references and building this kind of cultivating his garden, right? Cultivating his taste. And sometimes he has strikeouts, like, well, we didn't watch it on the podcast, but Before the Devil Knows You're Dead, not big fan, Tony, but also, I guess, on the podcast, Simon Killer, we tore it apart. Wasn't necessarily the best
I voted
film.
yes. I voted yes on it.
Well, there we go. Speaking to the male gaze or the male perspective.
Got me.
But, Tony, at the end of the day, Tony is a movie lover, and he'll give anything a chance. And I really appreciate, even not on the podcast, but just in general, how Tony has really pushed me to enjoy movies and think of movies more critically and not necessarily always bring my morality into play, like as is evidenced by some movies we've watched where the protagonist isn't exactly the best person. And then you have to start thinking, well, it's not like the writer or the director is trying to convince us that this is good or bad, but just to actually show us a situation, a mimetic situation from life, and how do we respond to it. So anyways, I've gone on too long. Let's go to Anthony.
All right. So I think this is one of those cases where, there's the difference between the list that we've done that Tony suggested and how he probably really is. I think if we were to do this in the first half, Tony would definitely be kind of the contrarian Armand White award of the jokester here, suggesting the Barney, suggesting things that he knows we probably not going to like, or at least most of us, to some extent. And I think in the kind of first half, I think my old joke about the Tony movie is somewhat true, which is the kind of movie that is also male-centric, puts the woman in kind of this morally gray danger, this morally gray kind of, situation, and ask us to really kind of make a choice. Do we keep with the movie, or do we escape? Do we leave it? And I think there's something to be said, though, for that at the same time, the kind of moral grayness, which I think has stuck, actually. The morally gray, kind of morally ambiguous, whether it's Cachet, whether it's Spring Breakers. So I think that's there. I think going past it, though, I think in the second half especially, is Tony's, at least in the movie suggested here, is also willing to give people, directors, always the benefit of the doubt. And the benefit of the doubt of looking at a lot of their kind of lesser movies, whether it's Collateral or something else, so, or Night Moves, for instance, which, Kelly Reichardt, of course, people normally think of like Certain Women or something, but Night Moves, kind of a curious choice, I think, if you would really think about it. So, and, the kind of course, word that belongs to Tony more than anyone else is cold. Movies that are unafraid to leave us cold and are unafraid to leave us feeling cold as we leave and think about it even. I think that's where I'd kind of stop. And that's kind of actually the consistent point.
Yeah. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, I think that Tony loves the idea that we all have this inherent evil, or not evil, but these flaws within us. And they're hiding right below the surface. And then they come up. And I think the inherent flawed man is a big kind of trope or motif that Tony really enjoys. Connor, go ahead.
There's one phrase that always stuck into my head. It's one that Tony himself explained to me about, the movies that he likes. There's one element in common.
Yeah.
The chickens come home to roost.
Yep.
Right? A sense of guilt, or a sense of something coming back against you. I think guilt is an important thing. Something coming back to bite you. But of course, we're not the inevitability of a process of, as we see someone struggle in that situation. I think that would go along with what Anthony said. Yeah, maybe coldness. That's a really interesting word to use, because I think often they have a slight edge of distance, or we're forced to, there's a starkness, to a lot of Tony movies. I think I would say one word I would use, not necessarily to describe Tony himself, but maybe his taste, is enfant terrible. That certainly captures a certain kind of Tony movies, right? A certain kind of provocation, a certain kind of also a sort of daring, formal innovation. But also, I think more and more too with Tony movies, I see like just a beautiful like humanism, a beautiful like attempt to look at really complicated life situations and kind of how can we improve, or how can we kind of like just taking a very hard look at very real life situations, and kind of in some ways even a moralistic way. Not necessarily that he would offer that moral, but that he would use the movie to kind of analyze these things on a very deep level. I'm thinking of Age of Innocence, right, where he had a very, very interesting take on sort of what that all means and what that means for a person, right, to be that character. And also for Krisha, I think, too. Maybe it was more implicit in that case. But also, you can't watch them with your dad. Don't watch them with your dad.
Absolutely. I think Age of Innocence you can watch with your dad, probably.
Watch with your dad. Watch that with your dad. But
no, I think you guys, that's interesting. And the way you guys kind of framed it, I wouldn't have thought like Cold, for instance. But no, it is interesting. I think, yeah, like, my movies, I'm more like seek out the like, and I like to think my tastes have shifted a little bit over the years. I think I was very self-conscious for a while after like Simon Killer and Night Moves of like, they're gonna think I just like movies about like women getting murdered or something. That made me. I got a little bit defensive about that. But no, I mean, I think you guys glommed onto a lot. I think the chickens coming home to roost was a great point because I rewatched Killing of a Sacred Deer the other night. And I'm like, oh my, of course I love this. This is the
that might be like the absolute all-time Tony movie. Even
that's
if not,
the greatest chicken coming home to roost of all time. Like, but definitely I think a sense of like a moral sense, a sense of kind of like confronting an uncomfortable or a painful or a fraught situation. I think also like dealing with like just things that are uncomfortable or things you don't like to think about, like Blue Velvet, an Anthony movie. Like that's a thing of like sort of it's kind of icky. It's kind of like uncomfortable. It's kind of like, it forces us to kind of confront like the darkness within us. And I really like that kind of thing. And I also really like the things that are colorful or formally innovative and like something that'll take like a really big risk. Like I give a lot of points for ambition and for like risk taking, even if I don't think it's 100% successful. Like if I walk away feeling like I've had an interesting experience, that to me is almost the most important thing. Like that to me is what I respond to most. So, and as for your choices, I'm not too shocked, and even down to Anthony's pick. So yeah, so it seems about right. So let's round it out with the Kirkinator, the Kirkster, the
Kirkster himself.
Just skip this part.
And I'll just continue real quick. I'll just start and I'll say my favorite movie, Kirk's, was Come and See. That was an early one that I just remember. I remember blowing my mind and traumatizing me in the way that I like. And I remember being very, very impressed too with it. I'm like, wow, like Kirk, this was a real because we've done like Spice World, and I was like, wow, like this is a lot. And it kind of showed me, I think, a different side of Kirk, maybe almost. Yeah, but that's a movie that still sticks with me and is certainly in my internal memeplex. It's one that I will reference periodically or that I will think of from week to week. So definitely Come and See for Kirk.
All right, let's hear from Connor, and then Anthony will round us out.
Well, it's definitely got to be Social Network. That was just a very great suggestion, Kirk. I loved it. So great. No, of course, I'm kidding. That was an anti-pick. Kirk was thinking to take that off the pedestal because that has Jesse Eisenberg in it, obviously. For fans of the show, you would know. You would never suggest Social Network. But, okay, yeah, I hate to be boring, and basic like this, but I probably would have said Come and See too. But I would have, just because, just an incredible viewing experience. This movie, unlike any I've ever seen, probably the most devastating movie I've ever watched. I'm so grateful to Kirk for introducing me to it. Something I'm always keeping in the back pocket, something that I see, when I close my eyes, before I go to bed. These images flash before my eyes. But, okay, kind of a sentimental favorite. Sentimental favorite would have to be Crybaby. Crybaby was a weird one, but I still have the soundtrack, the soundtrack on my phone or something, or, listen to it on YouTube. It's kind of a weird movie. Maybe it doesn't stand out, but I don't know. I just really love that episode we did. We had a great discussion. I think it captures Kirk's interest. If you go listen back to that episode too, how he brings in, John Waters' writings, because Kirk is a very curious person and he incorporates lots of things and he always brings an interesting perspective to things. I know that sounds a bit cliche, but, or a bit uninteresting to say, but I think that's a kind of a showcase. So maybe it's not his best movie he suggested. I think it's, my personal favorite after Come and See, I have to say, is one of the all-time greatest movies we watch on the podcast. I'd say it's really up there.
All right. So I think I'm going to start with the sentimental pick, right? Which would be, I got to go with Spice World, Kirk, which on the sentimental side, right? Which is still, I think, one of the most fun times I've ever had watching a movie. And I still actually very much remember vividly certain scenes from that movie that just made me laugh so hard at the time. And if I really think about, still make me laugh pretty hard. I still remember what we've talked about in my head about that movie. But actually, I think I'm going to kind of split the difference here, though. And I'm kind of cheating again because I'm going to say sort of tied for my actual favorites. On one hand, I was like Connor, leaning towards Crybaby, actually, which may seem like an obvious choice. The kind of John Waters, okay movie, the sort of Johnny Depp in it, the sort of fun of kind of the nostalgia pick there, the sort of poking fun satire of it. But I think the other movie, the one that left me devastated, to use Connor's phrase, and one that you've had me rewatch, is A Little Princess, Alfonso Cuarón's, my favorite movie I think Kirk has suggested, which really resonated with me. And I know it didn't work for Connor or Tony, but it was one of my favorites.
Thank you guys. I really appreciate it. Now let's hear how uncultured I am, how brusque and just overall barbaric I am. Let's hear it.
Kirk always makes these like self-deprecating jokes, and I think they're unfair. He's always joked about himself like having bad taste or like unrefined taste in movies, but I haven't really found that to be true at all. I mean, sometimes he'll have like something like Inception, which is a bit of a more, I suppose, a populist choice compared to like what we normally suggest, but that I think has more to do with us wanting to suggest like kind of things off the beaten path than us disliking that. Obviously, it made it in, but I always really appreciated Kirk's picks because I feel like they add a real variety and like a real, like, I think even early on, you hear his suggestions then and suggestions now, and I think they've changed. And I think what has happened is he's developed a greater confidence in terms of like his own taste, a greater confidence in terms of like, this is my kind of thing. And one thing I've always appreciated always about his suggestions is he shows a willingness to take something like, even like, what was the one with Leo, Blood Diamond?
Body of Lies.
Body of Lies, baby.
Something like, even something like Body of Lies, just something he saw that he liked and he wanted to bring to the table and wanted to pull it apart a little bit. He wanted to say, let's see what there is here. You know, let's see what's on the bone, you know? And I think that, you know, I think that's a valuable thing. And I think that he always, in his discussions, he always finds a way into the movie. He never just sets it on the table and says, all right, guys, have at her, like it's a turkey. He always carves the turkey. He always just shows us where the best meat is. He always shows us the dark meat. And he kind of leads us on these really interesting pathways. I think of like our discussion about The Hunt, which is one of the favorite episodes we've done. And Kirk did such a great job of kind of navigating that movie, which is sort of kind of an uncomfortable, you know, it is sort of like kind of an unpleasant or uncomfortable movie to watch now and to talk about, especially as like four guys. You almost feel weird talking about it. But I think Kirk did a very good job kind of threading that needle and keep us, or Downfall too. I think Downfall had that was a really, really interesting discussion. I'm always really interested to see, and even like next time we're doing Virgin Suicides, I'm not particularly interested in that movie, but I know from what he said already and from what I know of him from other episodes that he's going to have interesting things to say about it, things that I have not encountered before, things that I didn't think of when I watched it, that will open that movie up in front of me. So for all those things, I'm very appreciative of Kirk and all the movies he's brought so far. And I do think that there's definitely been a shift over the years in terms of his taste.
All right, Connor, have at it.
I'll have at it, Kirk. I find Kirk the hardest to summarize his taste. I think he is actually the most eclectic of us. I find it hard to nail down. I think Kirk often will lead his movie suggestions with, I don't know if you guys will like it, but I had a personal experience with this. There's a story behind Kirk's selections too. Not that he always shares it, but you get a sense. There was a moment. There was an experience. And he always brings his tools to the table, right? I think Kirk, in some ways, you know, he has the most elegant way of analyzing things or describing things. Though, of course, Kirk is also not prone to over-analysis, unlike some of us, where I think we are the kind of, I think it's true, though, Kirk, you know, I don't know if you find this a little bit, you know, backhanded. I think you're the least ostentatious of us. I think you're the most down-to-earth in a way. Not that your movies are less than in any way, but I think, you know, I mean, and I really appreciate that. But you always bring something. You always like, you know, push something, right? You always like have an angle or have a way of thinking about the movie that I always really appreciate. But that's you as a critic and you as a host, which of course, as Tony just said, is, you know, obviously you're a great host. I find it hard to really summarize what Kirk's movies are all about, though I would say that they are movies I all could watch with my dad. And they'd be ideal. Maybe not come and see.
We'll say real quick, Kirk, two things I forgot is that
and Spice World might take a little bit of convincing.
Your dad will love Spice World, I'm sure, once he sat down to watch it, Connor. But I think, and you said it before in talking about me, Kirk, but I think, yeah, you respond to, I think, strong emotions, like human drama and emotion. And if that's conveyed in like a direct and powerful way, and this is a taste I didn't share with you, that's something you very much respond to, as well as dealing with like real painful or complicated like human situations. And I also think too that you also have a very strong like moral sense, right? And we've argued about this before, like we've like, oh, you can't you got to take it in context, or take it with the time, or depiction doesn't equal endorsement or whatever. But I do think that it is important to like stay grounded and to maintain your sense of like, no, where am I right now? How do I feel about these things? And what is this movie? How does my philosophy, my morality, my sense of the world, my worldview, how does that interact with the movie's worldview? And I think those are worthwhile questions and important questions to ground ourselves. So I think that is an important contribution to Kirk's as well.
Thank you, Tony and Connor. Let's hear Anthony. I know he's got something fresh. Let's hear it. I want to hear it. Let's go.
I think Connor was right on one hand, right? You're also very difficult to pin down, at least for me. I think this is one of those issues because I think if I wasn't looking at the kind of list, if I didn't see the movies you have done over the years, I would be inclined to do what kind of Tony said, which is to say that you're kind of populously sort of inclined. I think the joke used to be that you're inclined towards movies that show on FX at 3:00 in the afternoon. But I think that's sort of untrue, with the exception of Leonardo DiCaprio and Michael Pitt, which I know we haven't done a Michael Pitt movie, but just some of those suggestions, like I Origins or, Leo's two movies that you've done, The Body of Lies and Inception. But I think the real heart of your movies always comes down to the sort of what if moral question. The idea of seeing yourself in a situation that is just a few steps away from ever happening, to be the teacher who's falsely accused, to be in the sort of pit, with Hitler, seeing the historical trauma in action, even the way you've responded with Krisha, right? To know the sort of secret and to be unable to kind of handle it because of your own sort of willingness to give into your addiction, and to hear the way you've talked about even something like something I think we've kind of forgotten about, but It's Such a Beautiful Day, the animated movie Tony picked about the kind of existential crisis of that character, and the way you've talked about A Woman Under the Influence, the sort of what if moral of recognizing your sort of morality, recognizing that you actually may be the person who's right and correct, but also knowing that the rest of society may not see that or may not be able to even get that. I think for that itself, which is a very abstract sort of idea, but that becomes a kind of question that you really grapple with. And I think Hunt is the kind of quintessential Kirk movie that deals with that. And I think you got that with just the way you were kind of passionately talking about it when you set it up.
The Kirkian quintessence, I would say, is The Hunt. Yeah, if I had to pick one.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate that. I think you're onto something, Anthony. I would describe it in a word almost as, I've used this word often on the podcast, but solipsistic. It's almost this idea that my perspective varies and is divergent from the popular perspective. And how do you, as a teacher, when you're almost being gaslighted by a community, or, how do you reckon with that? And what do your ego defenses, how do they enable you to survive, right? And do you suppress? Do you deflect? Do you use humor? What do you use? Are you introspective? And I really appreciate what you said, Anthony. And Connor, I think you're onto something with the eclectic, and also with the idea of me being less ostentatious. Tony said I'm self-deprecating. It's true. And I feel I would lie if I were to say I don't feel threatened by you guys in terms of your repertoire, like your working knowledge of cinema. Like, there is an element there where I feel inferior, and that's okay. That really is okay, because it allows me to kind of glean from you guys your knowledge and your understanding of cinema and its purpose. And I have this very basic understanding that I come to a movie and I say, where is this, like Tony said, how does this jive with my morality? Is this something I despise? Is this something I can relate to? Is this something I empathize with or am in love with, lust after? And then I'm also very nostalgic.
For sure.
What's that?
Lust after, for sure. Yeah.
Lust after Gene Tierney, right? Like someone who's a femme fatale, like a fatal killer, but is so beautiful and graceful. And there's something so tragic there. I really appreciate, Tony, what you said about the idea of the importance of bringing yourself into the movie. And I think, I always do bring myself into movies, for better or for worse, right? And it would make me kind of a very poor critic, but that's okay. It can make me,
I disagree, Kirk, completely. Actually, I'll tell you in a minute. But go ahead. You
Okay. Well, yeah. From my perspective, it could make me a good conversationalist, perhaps. I don't know about the critiquing aspect, but yeah, I bring my history into each movie I watch, and I bring my morality into it. And yeah, I think you guys have seen some of what I like. I'm afraid to share, perhaps because it's perhaps a little banal or facile, and I'm evolving. And really, that's what's so touching to me is, I guess the last thing I would say is, by enhancing and expanding my worldview in terms of cinema, you guys have actively improved the quality of my life. So I'm appreciative of that. So thank you. But Tony, go ahead. You were going to say something.
No, I was going to say that one thing I think you remind us is that I think it's we always talk about subjectivity, and I think it's a delusion, a really insidious delusion, the idea that criticism is objective in some way, right? Because criticism, essentially, it's interactive, right? You have a text, you have an object, and we all share this object. It's the same for all of us, that we're all looking at the same thing, right? And I think there's this idea that, like, who can describe that thing the best or evaluate it the best is the best critic. And I don't think that's true, because there's only so much that you can objectively say about a work of art. Half of it at least is the personal, half of it at least is your own worldview, your own context, your own value system, your own aesthetic preference, and your way of articulating it, right? So I think that it is always important to remember who you are and have a sense of who you are and where you stand in relation to this object in any kind of criticism. And I think that, I'm not going to say we always forget that or whatever, but I think you remind us that very persistently. And it's a thing that I forget sometimes. And it's like, no, there is no one right reading. There is no one right answer. There's no right opinion about Come and See or whatever, or any movie. It's all about our relationship to the work of art. And good criticism is being able to explore that and explain it well. And I think that's not talking about whether the movie is good, which is kind of beside the point. So.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This has been enlightening for sure, and enjoyable. And now we get to move on to the last piece. We want to leave you on a light note. And folks, if you've been with us this long, we really appreciate it. If you want to visit our Patreon, we have merch on sale. Tony has #overturn shirts that he's selling right now, $25, $35 for double XL. We really want you guys to engage with us, engage with the community. But our final segment for the special episode is, we are going to look at the forgotten choices. We are going to look at the nominations that were not chosen. And we are each going to nominate, again, an unchosen film. And we're going to discuss it. We're not going to be able to vote for our own, of course. And we're going to try to come to some majority consensus and choose that movie moving forward, and commit to doing a 75th episode special on that movie, the forgotten movie. So who would like to start? Does anybody feel very, kind of strongly about their choice?
I'll just cut in. I'll just do it. I feel very, very passionately about this choice. I'm a fire, Kirk, with this choice. Cloud Atlas. Anthony pitched it. That's all.
All right. Fair enough. I guess I can go. I have a movie that's more elaborate, more epic than Cloud Atlas. Can you believe that? It really is. It speaks to the human perspective, both visual and psychological and epistemological. I don't know. I don't know. It's I Origins, the best movie we've never seen. I've seen it. We have the best actor of the 21st century, Michael Pitt, who's basically Leonardo DiCaprio without connections. Great movie. Some might call it hack. They can go jump in a fucking lake, as Michael Pitt says in season 1 of Boardwalk Empire. Anyways, Connor or Anthony, go ahead.
So Kurt just messed me up, because I thought we weren't supposed to pick our own movies. I was going to literally suggest I Origins just to see Michael Pitt in action finally. But now, kind of scrambling. So I'm going to do something. I'm going to give Tony the benefit of the doubt, since I voted no so much to him before. I'm gonna go way back. I'm gonna go to a movie that he may not even remember pitching, but from a long time ago. I'm gonna say that we should do Wild Tales.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You're right. I did not remember pitching that, but it was good. Okay.
What's Wild Tales? Is that an animated movie?
No, it's a anthology film.
Mm-hmm.
There's like 4 short films in one, all about vengeance.
Or your praise is very high. Now I remember that. I remember my interest being piqued by that, but I've never looked it up.
What year?
This is 2014. It's from Argentina.
Okay. Interesting. Connor, finish us off.
As for me, guys, this one is personal. Something from my past. I let slip through my fingers. Anthony brought it up during this episode. I'm speaking, of course, of Scott Pilgrim, whose ghost I had to sort of avenge by suggesting Shaun of the Dead, which got picked and we watched, and it was great. But this is an Edgar Wright movie that maybe cleaves closest to my own psyche, my own issues, my own complexes. It's personal. It needs to be revisited. And my opinion on the movie has changed in some ways since I first saw it. But I really regret. I think it could have been an important moment of growth for me if I'd only picked it. So I'd like to reverse history. I'd like to just go back to the past and watch Scott Pilgrim with you guys.
My goodness, what choices. This
was suggested by Anthony, and then I at the last minute I backed out.
We'll just give a quick 15 seconds to everybody. I will just say I haven't seen any of those 3 movies. Cloud Atlas interests me the most of them, though Scott Pilgrim sounds interesting because I feel like I would hate it. So it would actually be kind of a fun conversation. And I know everybody else has seen it to death, so it could be fun. And Wild Tales is the wild card. But Origins, we need Michael Pitt, man. He's just so sexy.
I think,
cool.
Kirk, you would like Wild Tales and Cloud Atlas. I think you would both like.
Okay.
Wild Tales, I think for sure you would like. Cloud Atlas, I'm pretty sure you'd like.
What about Scott Pilgrim?
I honestly don't know. I could see you disliking it.
Okay.
Well,
okay. Anyways, fair enough. Tony, anything to add? Which one do you want to watch outside of Cloud Atlas?
Is this a voting? Is that what, did you vote?
Yeah, I guess I'll vote. I'll vote for Cloud Atlas.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I've not seen Origins. I am fascinated at the fact that you bring it again. Like you clearly have, there's clearly something about this movie that is, and the thing is, like, I don't know if I can stand breaking Kirk's heart like this. What if I hate Michael Pitt's performance? Like, what kind of position is that to put myself in?
It's not possible, man.
Scott Pilgrim versus the World is just, I just never cared for that movie. I really don't. It just left me I thought it was very like high on its own supply and like really obnoxious. And I don't know. I'm sure there's stuff in it. It just did not do it for me. I don't know. I am perhaps selfishly, I'm going to vote for Wild Tales.
Okay. We can't let this be 1-1-1-1.
Well, no, it's all right. It's all right.
Okay.
We'll deal with it after. If there's a tie, we'll deal with it another way.
We'll go to the Supreme Court. Yeah. Anthony, go ahead.
All right. Well, let's see. Origins interests me. Like I said, I was going to bring it. But I think Connor makes the good point, which is I haven't seen Scott Pilgrim from start to finish since I was in high school, or since it came out. And I think, is it a chance to kind of destroy my sort of teenage love for that movie? Maybe. I think it's a chance for all of us to kind of destroy our Tony didn't like it, but destroy our sort of adolescent connection to it and the sort of culture it represents. So I got to go with Scott.
Connor, you have so much power right now. Go ahead.
Do we all vote for different ones?
Yes, so far. So Connor, you can either tie it or choose a winner.
Hold on. So we have one for Wild Tales, we have one for Scott Pilgrim, and we have one for
Cloud Atlas.
For Cloud Atlas.
So Origins is a tie. Everything else, you can't vote for Scott Pilgrim. Everything else is a win.
This is really tough, guys. I wanted to go for Origins, but I guess that's kind of out of the question. That would have been my pick. But to avoid the stalemate, Wild Tales I just don't know anything about. Cloud Atlas, I think, is probably the movie that I'd have to vote for because Tony's been on my case about it for a long time. It's been sort of in the background. It's something I've always kind of just said, I don't want to watch that. what I want to. So anyway, so I think it could be beneficial for me if we somehow locked it in and made it a guaranteed episode of the podcast. So I'll go for Cloud Atlas. I just don't know anything about Wild Tales. Maybe I would enjoy it a lot more, but Cloud Atlas, I think, is the thing that I need in my life.
Wild Tales is the safer choice. That's the one I feel pretty confident all of you would at least like. Cloud Atlas is a little bit riskier.
All right.
But I think it's a high risk, high reward situation where if you like it, you'll really like it. But you could also hate it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there you have it, folks. Tune in for our 75th episode, which will be in approximately 8 years. It will be Cloud Atlas, Atlas Shrugged, a rereading by Tony. We're very excited, but in closing, I guess, let us just say thank you so much for listening. We do this for you, but mostly for us, but also for you. And we love you all. And Anthony, please sign us off.
I'll have what she's having.